Hello. So this presentation is drawn from part of a collaborative paper that I and Dr. Ma Rada and Dr. Alexandra Hardwick, both at Oxford, have written for a special double issue of Angelaki on creepiness as queer ecology. And I'm very excited to be representing our research at Multiplatform. Our paper is on the 2016 game Darkest Dungeon. The first one, we don't talk about the second one. It's worse. I'll happily discuss that afterwards. A game that is very centrally about both occulture and ritual. We analyze Darkest Dungeon as a game that originally presents itself as offering a sanitizing project, a literal crusade to restore an estate and violently cleanse a set of occult others from its lands, but where every aspect of your stated mission, from its righteousness to its feasibility, quickly start disintegrating as you play. As you repeat the central ritual of the dungeon crawl, new intimacies and understandings open up between you and your enemies, creating openings for new forms of traversal, sideways futures, and remakings of your character's flesh against the ostensible linear progression of the game itself. It's a game where boundaries collapse in quite spectacular fashion, and where rites, RIT, turn out to be performing different tasks than intended. Darkest Dungeon opens with said unusually long narrative cutscene in which the ancestor, who also serves as the narrator of the game, despite, as you can tell, doing so posthumously, although we'll get into that, reveals both your role and the game's ostensible goal. The ancestor is a very rich owner of an estate, a venerable house, opulent and imperial. The colonial overtones are introduced early, who becomes consumed with an obsession with the supernatural and with rumors that the estate itself is the gateway to some fabulous and unnameable power. In the intro, he says he exhausted his fortune to get to the bottom of this mystery, but throughout the game, he gradually reveals that his experimentations have been a lot more murderous than he mentions there. He uncovers the unnameable power. It is a gateway to an antediluvian evil, a festering abomination that he terms the Darkest Dungeon. You, the player, are not a specific character with a specific face. You are the heir to the estate, here to return home, claim your birthright, and deliver your family from the ravenous, clutching shadows of the Darkest Dungeon. Your goal is a reparative one, and one that would restore the logics of inheritance. Your in-game goal is to cleanse each of the 4 main areas of the estate from the monsters engendered by that antediluvian evil, and then to enter and defeat the Darkest Dungeon, itself a 4-part enterprise. This is in the service of you claiming the estate and protecting your family, although aside from the putatively deceased ancestor, there are no family members in sight. The game's characters are instead your employees, a deliberately anachronistic, diverse pack of mercenaries, each with different skills and movesets. You start with a helmeted crusader and a gun-toting highwayman, but there are 16 different available classes, including the DLC. To quote reviewer Julie Muncie, you are not a hero so much as you are a middle manager, one who outsources all the work and all the violence to your employees and who keeps most of the spoils, although improving your roster's weapons and skills is very costly and requires constant dungeon re-entry. And the risk for your roster is high. Like a traditional roguelike, Darkest Dungeon includes permadeath, but it's not you who's at risk of permanently dying, it's your characters. And if they do, you can instantly replace them with one of the eager new recruits who arrive each week, though you'll lose the money you invested in leveling them up. If you're an attentive player who cares about lore, you'll start noticing inconsistencies in Darkest Dungeon's narrative quite quickly. For one thing, the ancestor is very big on your goal being to cleanse the dungeons by killing their creatures, and he even discourages you sometimes from seeking money at said mission's expense, but your characters have not shown up to do any cleansing. They're here to ransack the dungeons for money and valuable relics, as indicated in the names of some of them, like the Bounty Hunter and the Grave Robber. The dungeons are canonically never cleansed of monsters in Darkest Dungeon, no matter how much you play, for reasons that will become clear later. For another thing, the sources of power in the game are noticeably confusing. You are fighting occult monsters who are often explicitly affiliated with dark and transformative magic, and you do have figures of Christianized righteousness on your side, such as the Crusader and the Vestal, but you also have characters in your roster who are resourcing unknown magics, such as a healer who is literally called the Occultist, and yes, someone should be paging Edward Said about him, and a shapeshifter called the Abomination, for instance. Your characters all readily recognize your enemies as enemies, but it's unclear whether that's actually due to a difference in kind or due to the nature of your enterprise, as well as the non-humanoid bodies of the monsters. So the logic of the game's core rite, the dungeon cleansing, is quickly recontextualized from hero's journey to cash grab, and indeed you mostly use these dungeon crawls to gain resources from boss battles. You might still think, well, I'm defending the in-game hub village, the hamlet, and its innocent citizens from violent monsters, but as you explore the dungeons, you find that the split between the hamlet and the dungeons is artificial and was mostly driven by the ancestors' violence. The dungeons are full of mercenaries who the ancestor refused to pay, or who rebelled against the ancestors' murder spree, women who the ancestor tried to kill or chased out of the village who had become cultists, and mutated village pigs the ancestor experimented on. The ancestor has charged you to restore the family to the estate and to restore peace, but the only model you have of your birthright is one of ultraviolence. Darkest Dungeon isn't a game that openly and obtrusively asks you to consider the morality of your player character and your choices. You can probably blast through this context quite easily if you're just here to fight monsters, but even unobservant players are fed cues that the core occult power at the heart of the game is not really being bothered by your actions that much. One of my focuses in the paper we wrote is on queerness and its relation to both the core gameplay loop and the enemy narratives. The core loop, the dungeon crawl, is a martial activity that renders gender binaries quite fluid. We talk a bit in the paper about the indistinct gender of many of the characters and the gender neutrality of their pool of names, for instance. I'm going to sneeze. We'll see if that happens. And produces a continual deferral of the domesticity evoked in funhouse mirror form by the ruined state. To quote the paper, intimations of queerness in this kind of like gender binary breakdown are grounded in a wider wartime deprivation of concept of home or of any rest and connection that is not temporary and provisional. The characters aren't really domesticated, we don't know where they came from, we don't know where they're going, and indeed they're from a range of time periods and contexts, displacing the game from realistic time. The game passes week by week, but a week is only marked by a dungeon run, suggesting time is arrested if the dungeons aren't being entered. The dungeon run is a ritual that marks time, but it is also a ritual that changes the body. Characters don't just gain XP and level up in Darkest Dungeon, for instance. They are intimately marked by the dungeons through the stress, quirk, and illness systems, where characters pick up sickness and neuroses at random within the dungeons, neuroses that include automatic actions and fastidious traits, and they can also be killed specifically through stress, not just through injury from monsters. The game ritual is a ritual that creates the character, creates their body and its frailty, and we feel this through our investment in the cultivated specificities of particular characters, and our anxiety at potentially losing them in the dungeons. But even as the dungeons individuate the characters, they also mark them as part of a less differentiated community of flesh that encompasses both your characters and the monsters. As the game hits its climax and the Darkest Dungeons open, apologies for any of you who have not reached this point, all the game's characters start to unravel in dazzling fashion, their avatars becoming skeins of flesh before flickering back into their original forms. Instead of the individualization and privatization offered by the family and estate model, the Land of Darkest Dungeon offers a tantalizing, unnerving vision of a community beyond sense, beyond boundaries. All characters with flesh are part of one thing, one strange family, except that you, the bodiless middle manager player, are unsure of where you fit in this equation. There's also a lot of work on queer and strange movement, both within and outside of games context, that went into how we think of the movement aspect of Darkest Dungeon and how that relates to the game's themes. Katrina Mortimer Sanderlands' Unnatural Passions Notes Toward a Queer Ecology connects the strategic domestication from the 19th century onward of more recreational, remote wild spaces and healthy green spaces inside cities with the desire to combat urban homosexuality. She takes the example of the public campground where trees were carefully cut down in a pattern that screened campsites from one another, but not from the roadway or path, so that the rangers or wardens could still see in and make sure nothing illegal, such as sodomy, was taking place. Given the queer connotations of many of Darkest Dungeon's monsters and monstrosity in general, from the all-female crone cult of the Weald to the undulating orgies of flesh in the Warrens, you could configure the player as Darkest Dungeon's warden, cutting through the cabins and severing the fishy and fleshy intimacies of their monsters. But there's another sense in which the player and their roster are being seduced by the dungeons, which serve as the inverse of Mortimer Sanderlands' gentrified urban-rural. Underground privacy flourishes in the dungeons alongside environmental wildness, rather than the campground, which is tamed and unprivate. Paradigms of queer movement in video games usually emphasize straying from paths, from goals and regulated time, such as Gaspar Pellison's paradigm of queer flânery, where characters celebrate the art of slowing down and refuse to engage in goal-oriented activities, purposely descheduling and opposing the rituals of a prescribed and reproductive routine. And Darkest Dungeon would seem to absolutely oppose Pellison's flânery logic or Bo Ruberg's ideas of the queer possibilities of failure, for instance. Darkest Dungeon's movements are intensely circumscribed, and failing a dungeon run just leaves you slightly set back rather than diverging your path at all. But the walks through the dungeons themselves, as circumscribed as they are not the imagined, peaceful, healthful, heterosexually robust walks of the recreational wild space. They are fearful and libidinal walks, where enemies can jump out at any moment, and characters who develop forced interaction quirks will leap wildly to steal food, grab suspicious artifacts, and touch dead bodies. The dungeon even resembles the small, inaccessible, little-trafficked, badly lit areas mostly on the waterfront, which Berlant and Warner describe in Sex in Public as the only viable locations for public gay sex in NYC, after zoning laws pushed gay establishments out of the city center. These unlabeled, unwanted, badly lit corridors in the dungeons are full of both boredom and fear, iterations of the same straight corridor and the same static room. This repetitiveness and anxiety are only interrupted by encounters with strange objects or the unexpected release of a new fight. As such, the experience of walking constitutes boredom alleviated by a libidinal feeling of unease, of waiting to be overwhelmed by an unexpected force, namely the action of the creatures. The inexhaustibility of the occult becomes central to the ritual supposedly devoted to defeating it, revealing the life of the game to exist not in the estate you are supposedly trying to free, but in the excitement and intimacy of the dungeon's hidden ecosystem. There is a lot in this game, and a lot of monsters potentially read and analyze. My first run took like 100 hours. I'm going to briefly talk about our work on one of the monsters, a recurring boss fight in the Warrens, I think, evocatively called the Flesh, the inchoate flesh, the unstable flesh, or the formless flesh. You face different monsters repeated times in better incarnations. The flesh is the result of the ancestors' experiments on reanimating pigs. It is a creature of waste. All of the excess flesh of the failed pig experiments was stuffed into these underground catacombs, and its half animation came together to form this half-alive, undifferentiated monster, fusing itself together in the darkness. The quote, "The titles are paper." In my section, I talk about the flesh as essentially an incarnation of Julia Kristeva's idea of the abject, the thing that rattles the borders of the human while also constituting those borders, that must be thrust aside continually in order to live. It embodies corpse, bodily waste, refuse, and rejected food all in one. And it's also pig flesh, which is explicitly referenced in Powers of Horror as the objectionable meat that, if eaten, brings about divine malediction and entails a whole range of sexual and moral prohibitions. The flesh is an avatar of the dissolution of bodily boundaries that is affecting the entire village, and that originates in the ancestor's goal to transgress all moral and informational boundaries for his own gain. As such, it is both the site of utter horror and destruction, of pain, the deprivation of life and space, the horror of trying to separate yourself from that which is yourself, but it is also a tantalizing leveling figure, a figure of the orgiastic and terrifying dissolution of bodies and hierarchies. The ancestor's mission to murder his way to the top of a social hierarchy has created conditions where the brutality of hierarchy is very legible, but where hierarchies and lineages are also becoming very difficult to sustain. There is not going to be a reproductive family in Darkest Dungeon that follows the lines we expect. The only reproduction that is going on looks like the flesh continually reconstituting and changing itself. To conclude, Darkest Dungeon, which literally refers to a superlative hidden power, the occult heart of the world that reveals all knowns as unknowns, is a game full of rich material for thinking about games and culture. It's a game in which you are offered a relatively traditional vision of a game environment, the passage of time, movement, and progression, and of what monsters are, but the occult powers that structure the game's world interrupt that traditional vision, revealing it both as violent and as doomed to fail. With the game disintegrating into an infinite loop at the end, there is no way to win under the original conditions of winning, to cleanse the land, to restore the estate. Instead, the game reveals itself as truly about the dungeon ecologies the player was supposed to destroy, the orgiastic flesh the player was supposed to recompose. Without a reparative mission, there can be new kinds of play. And without an order for the ritual or loop to restore, we can luxuriate in the ritual for its own sake. Thank you very much.